the goal of this company is what we call scientific longevity. How do we really add 20 years of healthy life? So I think there's really three fundamental long-term goals of scientific longevity. One is, if you look at today, developed nation, average life expectancy, 80-something, we live our life 80 years. We probably have about a third of our life in perfect health. You're totally well. But there is a period of our health, it's called transitional state. You have hypertension, your LDL is out of whack, you're overweight, you can't go to sleep. But you're not quite sick. So this is where we are, healthcare. And we Americans spend 20% of our GDP maintaining today's healthcare system. 20% of GDP, trillions of dollars, much bigger than defense budget, okay? But imagine the baby boomers, 70 million people going to 85. Do you think our GDP can support, if we stay the same old, spending $1 million in the last 3 months of late-stage colon cancer, or late-stage breast cancer, or late-stage, Alzheimer's? It will bankrupt our economy for sure. So what we think is, through science, can we live a life which is 100 years old, but majority of your life is actually well? And, you shrink the transitional stage for as short as humanly possible. And then your last few days, you drop that, I think, we spend way too much money on the last 12 months of somebody's, life. I actually think because what we are trying to develop is data-driven. In the future, the care system we deliver to the world should be very inexpensive. Because the US, we spend too much money on, the individual mechanical kid, right? How difficult is it for you to get 30 minutes of your specialist? But if I had your 10-year worth of data and using AI machine learning, I probably know more about your body than your 30 minutes physician spends on you. And risk is important for your house. It's a seed, but eventually, the fire in the right environment will create the smokestack. And then, late stage, the fire is so big, you can't save it anymore. So how do we use technology to really know the risk very early on? And genomic has a lot to do with that. If you look at today, what kills us? Let's say every one of us is programmed to live to 100, 110. But because we live in the real world, we have risks. The number one disease, this is actually the real number in 2021. But if you take COVID away, the number one killer is cardiovascular. So if you actually really want to live over 100, you better make sure your blood vessel is healthy. And the number 2 killer is cancer. Number 3 is, in the US, is already dementia. And then, stroke is part of the cardiovascular disease. A lot of these are impacted by metabolic diseases. One of the key technology we're working on is how do we delay all these major disease risk factors by 20 years in your life. If somebody is going to die at 80 years old with a stroke, how do we prevent that? Push that out to 200 years. So there's a group of people actually live very long. It's actually prevalent in the United States. So there's a Time magazine. There's a whole issue talks about the science of living longer. So there's a whole chapter in this issue saying, why does the president live pretty long? They're pretty stressful people. So this paper basically talks about there's 3 pillars of presidential care. The first pillar is you really need to know yourself. What kind of virus you have, what kind of bacteria you have, what kind of genetic background you have. The key actually here is continuous monitoring. The people in the financing world, you know that you cannot assess how healthy a company is by just looking at 1 quarter of financial statement. So you need continuous, assessment. This is why we create this membership. I always say, if you come here once every 10 years, there's nothing I can do for you because that's 1 data point. It's like you tell me to do consulting for a company, you give me 1 quarter of financial statement. So continuous is important. The second one is you have to have expert to help you. In the future is AI machine learning with the help of physician. You have to have a team of people because healthcare is way too complex. I mean, the best hospital in the world, Mayo Clinic, Mass General. I always puzzle, the medicine is such a compartmentalized industry. The people look at your eye, they don't worry about your prostate or your colon or your, bottom. Okay. The people look at your skin, they don't care about your teeth. Okay, so they don't care about anything else because it's so compartmentalized. So you need a group of physicians really look at you holistically. The third pillar is really, all diseases should be taken care of at as early stage as humanly possible. You can treat it at very early stage because of the technology innovation. And I'll share with you some of the cases. So this is really what we are developing is the HLI, the Human Longevity 100 program. You can say, this is a digitalized presidential care. You come here to the clinic for half a day, we collect 150 gigabytes of data on you. We have your genome, we have your whole body MRI, we have your metabolome. But then if you come here for 5 years, you have almost terabytes of data. And using AI machine learning data, plus working with the specialists, we can probably predict what disease you will be dying of. But it matters that if you have all these data, if I tell you your biggest risk factor is dementia, and I tell you 30 years ahead of time, the question is, can you do something to alleviate that? The answer for me is absolutely. If you don't sleep well, go to the Stanford doctor. Make sure you sleep well. Okay, so right? Because sleep is so important for dementia. It's so complex. I think you almost need, the people who study 20, 30 years of this in this industry to help you. I'll share with you the cancer, prevention. I can tell you today, with the bleeding edge cancer prevention technology, in this room, if you utilize all these technology, your lifetime chance of dying from cancer is already reduced by 90%. So we have genetic reasons. Some people have genetic reasons. But then, you have the phenotype. We use whole body MRI because there's a lot of controversy. Why should, we think, by the time you are over a certain age, you should do a whole body MRI, kind of scan your whole body just to see if there's any small tumor growing in your body. And then, there's this whole new technology for liquid biopsy. So if you combine these technologies together, your lifetime chance of dying from cancer is already reduced by 90%. I think the entire human race is still underestimate the power of our genetics. 20-some years ago, to sequence your genome cost $100 million. But look at the cost of sequencing is dropping down. So right now, the cheapest we can find as a research grade genome is I think $200. And you only need to do once in your lifetime. That means if you live 100 years, it's $2 a year. But the most difficult part is actually not having your genome sequenced. It's understanding your genome, which is a lot harder than most people think. The knowledge is 5%. We human beings today only understand about 5% of our genome. But in the next 10 years, I think that will accelerate. I think for major diseases like breast cancer, Alzheimer's, I think our knowledge will accumulate much faster because the government and everybody, they invested so much to understand. And this is what we are trying to do because you need longitudinal data. So this is actually a Google-like search engine we developed, to really to do a deep dive on your genetics. So it's still quite complicated, but, we are the first company in the world that has a FDA-approved ClearCap report for whole genome sequencing to understand all your 3 billion codes. This is a friend of mine divided. We did a sequencing, we did this deep dive. We find out she has a BRCA2 mutation. This happens only in Asians. Very rare. And because of this information, we sent her to, we did all kind of tests. Lo and behold, she already had a 1 centimeter breast cancer. And she was operated by the best breast cancer surgeon at Mass General Hospital. Took out the tumor, we sequenced the tumor. It's a very aggressive tumor. But she was so lucky because it was still localized 1 centimeter. But the interesting thing is both of their daughters carry the same gene the mother carries. So not only by helping the mother, now we actually have a strategy to help the daughter. You vigorous tested your odds of dying from breast cancer is so low, because the technology with MRI, with mammogram, you really don't, I don't think her daughter will ever die of breast cancer as long as she's being taken care of, with today's knowledge. Right? This is the whole body MRI. So this Center Craig's friend, in the morning, he came to our clinic and said, I'm so healthy, you guys can't do anything. In the afternoon, we told him that, you have a lymphoma in your body. And then the liquid biopsy, the grill, because today's the sequencing technology is so advanced. Tumor cell has mutations. So if you have a small tumor growing in your body, the tumor cell dies and shed the DNA into your bloodstream. So today you can use deep sequencing to discover in your body you already have a residual tumor growing in you. Right? So we call it liquid biopsy. So a liver cancer over the size of 3 centimeters is very dangerous. Over 6 centimeters is a death sentence. But you can now, using liquid biopsy and image it and detect them at 0.2 centimeters, you can see it. So technically the technology is already there, that nobody should die of liver cancer. Here's, I'll give you a few more examples. So this is actually a Japanese American came to our clinic. His father died of cardiovascular disease. His grandfather died of cardiovascular disease. He said, my family is doomed. But if you do the whole genome sequencing, he has a gene called PCSK9. So it's genetic. Genetically, he has very bad LDL cholesterol. But luckily, there's a drug made by Novartis. It's an siRNA drug. You only need to do once every 6 months injection. His LDL is more than normal. So in the future, people like that, his father, his grandfather died around 50. That's called a genetic fate. But with today's technology, I think this time, as long as he stays with us, I think, he should never die of cardiovascular disease. This is really what we talk about, precision medicine, individualized medicine. Last example I'll give you is Alzheimer's. So there's now genetic tests. Alzheimer's clearly has a genetic element to it. So we have a score called polygenic risk score. You can pick 20 genes. This is all very well published. When you're born, you already know, you have higher genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's. This is a client. If you look at his hippocampal occupancy on the MRI, this person has a genetic predisposition for Alzheimer's. He has a gene called ApoE4. But if you look at his hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that controls your short-term memory, it drops much faster than the average human being. So 7 years ago, we already predicted this professor will get Alzheimer's. He never believed us. But last year, 2023, he's officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Retrospectively, we probably could have done something different. But this, the Alzheimer's research is still at its very infancy. But there's plenty of papers. There's a Lancet paper that tells you there's all kinds of things you can do to, delay Alzheimer's. This is actually the algorithm we developed to predict an individual's lifelong risk of developing Alzheimer's. Right now, we have 3 clinics. One is, the oldest is in San Diego. So this one is about 2 years old. We built one in Beijing because, I think, my dream is always to democratize this to billions of people. In the future, it's all going to be AI data driven. I'm not going to get too much into the nitty gritty. The punchline of this paper is when people think they're healthy, if you use the bleeding edge technology to assess them, they're not so healthy. About 2% of them, we already can find cancer in people that they think they're healthy. There's, people has aneurysm. Their brain has like a grape-sized aneurysm. It can burst anytime. And 7% people has, already have signs of coronary heart blockage, which is, with the risk back for heart attack. About 40% of people, we think about 14% of people already have pretty serious health risk factors. And the 40% of them has chronic risk factors. So right now, our clinic is tailored to the high-end client base, corporate client. Let's help the people who can afford it. We tell the people who can afford it, say, you are supporting the future of longevity management for humanity. So the presidential care will be delivered, using data. Right? So in the future, this is really the goal of scientific longevity. Majority of the human beings should, like Charlie Munger, like Henry Kissinger, can live to 100, productive, then drop dead. So we think that medicine historically has been a clinical science supported by data. We think medicine in the future is about to become a data science supported by clinicians. And with this new model, we're all going to live over 100 and healthy, productive.